Hey, it's David with No Chaser, and happy Halloween. I know I have some fans in other countries. This is like a pagan holiday we celebrate by having kids go to strangers' houses and giving them candy, which is something we teach them not to do every other day of the year. But anyways, I'll take this off now. It might be distracting. I might keep it on. But speaking of being a kid like holiday, today's topic I wanted to cover something that I'd, been thinking about, where I was in a therapy session and they were, I'm always reticent to thinking that there's something in my past that if I could just uncover, like some small sort of trauma or something that started it all, like as if you can investigate the past and it's like some hidden thing that, like, that's why I have trust issues, or that's why I detach, or this is why I'm impulsive. And I think you always evolve as a person, and certainly this is not to dispel any sort of PTSD or trauma related thing that affects people, so there's definitely stuff that has happened in people's childhoods that affect them. I mean, that's what I'm talking more about is like trying to find something in your past to explain your future or your present rather behavior. And when I was thinking about this, I thought about, man, I first drank when I was 13, maybe 12 or 13. It didn't strike me as anything like super great. It was just kind of like an event. It was just something to do with friends, and we all kind of dared each other to do it. So we had like probably half a pint, and we got obliterated off that. Didn't really care much for it. Smoked weed a couple of times, but my first sort of big moment of getting addicted actually wasn't alcohol, but it was Vicodin. I was I was 15. I was still going through depression. I had been in depression a while, and although everything seemingly was going good in my life, just I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I didn't feel well. Like I was doing well in sports and school, had a girlfriend, everything you kind of want externally, and I just felt empty on the inside, as depression makes you feel. It's one of those things where you're internally suffering regardless of what's externally happening. And I had these like teeth pulled. I thought they were wisdom teeth at the time, but it was just regular teeth, whatever. But they had to do like actual surgery, so they prescribed me Vicodin, and I was just reckless, and I was like, screw this, I'm gonna take like an extra 2 or something. And I got high, and it was one of the best feelings I had in the world. It was like a tectonic shift in my psyche. It was something that I describe as like an aha experience, but usually like an aha experience is when you discover something, or it's generally seen as something positive. This was not good at all. This was a shift that said, oh, I can depend on chemicals for my happiness from here on in. Like, I love this feeling, and I want to feel this all the time. When I'm talking about that moment when you get addicted, I think I've talked about it before, but really what I wanted to bring up about that is just, I think about it, and from that point on, I had pursued opiates for a while, still drank and whatever, and then it was, I had first gone to treatment when I was 19, and that was for opiates. It's funny, I was thinking like, oh man, that was a bad period of my life, but good thing that's over. It's just like, no man, we're just getting started. You haven't even started your alcohol phase yet, which is going to last like over 3 times as long. But I was just thinking about that. Like, man, the chemicals, like, they impacted my life at the age of 15 and would go on to impact it more and more. And that's so crazy to me. They talk about like your frontal lobe isn't fully formed. What is it, when you're like 23 or maybe even 25 or something? I think about like how that affects my development, and for other people as well too, like how much your development is affected by the fact that if you got hooked young, that is already something interfering with, like I said, your mental and emotional development, even physical. But it's just something I kind of took for granted. A lot of people talk about how addiction stunts your growth, and almost in a way that, I wouldn't take it this far, but some people say like you stop growing emotionally the moment you get addicted to drugs and alcohol. I don't think it's that severe. I think you go through life, there's things you process. It's certainly affected, but I think about that for people where, I don't know, it's not like a super salient point here, but just the idea of reflecting on how much that affects who you become, and how hard recovery is, because you have to like traverse all of that. Like you kind of have to get on like an accelerated program to like get just back to normal, you know? Like I've heard a lot of people in recovery, they'll say things like adulting is hard, or it's hard to be an adult. And normal people say that too, but I think they mean it more as is like they're just discovering, you know, not only living sober, but trying to kind of just catch up on being a person. And just, you know, if you think about it, like think about your first relationship that you had, maybe when you're 15 or something like that, and how, you know, how you handled it probably so differently from like your most recent relationship. I mean, you would at least hope it matured some, you know, like if you think about addiction kind of stunting your growth, you're talking about dealing with stress, and you're talking about handling life and relationships from a point where you didn't experience those things normally. Like that's the one thing, is I won't say it completely stopped mental and emotional growth in that way, but I will say that, you know, it affected it. And just to think that it had gone on for so long, that through all that stuff, through all your first, you know, I know some people that got addicted as young as 8 that I've met. Some people are kind of late bloomers, but you're just going through these periods of your life and everything's askew, because when the addiction is running through it, you don't experience things like a normal person. There's always that alcohol, or there's always the drugs that are kind of like intervening. And, you know, that's just like, I would say when you're a moderate sort of addict or alcoholic, you know, as time goes on, things get worse. So then, like, your life is heavily affected by that type of stuff, to where you're not even experiencing things normally. Like, when I think about that, like, just the non-experience of things, I think about my time in college. And a lot of people, you know, when they go to college, it's their first time maybe being out on their own, or it's certainly their first time being exposed. Usually, like I went to a bigger state college, and you're in the dorms and you're around people, and you just meet a bunch of different people. Sometimes it's a bunch of different ideas. Sometimes you break kind of the paradigms that were set in place for you. And I think about that and how impactful that can be on a person. But at that time when I first did that, I was addicted to drugs or alcohol. At that time it was more so drugs, but so I wasn't fully on board with that type of stuff. I mean, part of like my everyday struggle at that point, especially with opiates, was just chasing drugs, finding dealers. It wasn't joining these, you know, like a rec dodgeball league, or meeting new people from class, or hanging out with somebody that you know through a friend of a friend, and being experiences with like different personalities and different people. Like just I'm using this one example as like all that stuff that everybody else experienced, I didn't, because most of my time in that first year, again, like I said, was just chasing drugs. Or if I couldn't find drugs, then it was getting drunk. And you could consider that in your first relationship, your first marriage, raising a child, starting your first like job, like big time job, or all of that stuff is just impacted by it. And your development through it is, like I said, at the least, drugs and alcohol is going to intervene. And as time goes on, it gets worse. And so it's strange to think about most of what I've experienced, that, you know, a lot of people have different lives and experiences, obviously, but there are some kind of fundamental things that most people go through, and to never fully experience those as a just fully sentient, sober person, I don't know, it makes me like reconsider. I could look at it in a negative life, like, man, you know, I think I'd be more adept and more responsible and more mature if I hadn't, you know, if I could develop normally. But in one way, trying to look at a silver lining, maybe it's not too bad, because I get the experiences I have, you know, they may not be new to other people. They may seem like the ones they've had before, but I get, there's, you know, when in the longer times of sobriety that I've had, it was kind of interesting, sometimes taxing, sometimes stressful, but always sort of interesting having these experiences. Sometimes I felt embarrassed by them, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm 25 or I'm 30 or I'm 32, and this is the first time that I'm, you know, like working a job that has a yearly salary and actually handling responsibilities, and, you know, not just like actually wondering about marriage and family and stuff instead of just the booze. But there's something nice in that because it keeps you engaged with life. Or at least it did for me. Anyways, I don't know. This was just sort of like food for thought kind of topic about how you reconsider your life from how you developed if you are an addict alcoholic. If you're watching this and you're not one, maybe you know somebody in your life that is. That's something to consider too, especially if there's times where you're wondering why they could be so immature or how they just don't, quote, have their shit together, and maybe it'll help you give them more grace or something. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not claiming to be some arbiter of wisdom and advice. I'm relaying the experience that I've had and I know that others have had, and hopefully there's some comfort or entertainment or something that you guys can get for that. If you're in recovery, stay in there. I hope that you're finding a life worthwhile. If you're still drinking and using, I wish you the best. I wish you the least amount of harm possible, and hopefully you can find your way out of it. Obviously, never any judgment. I still struggle day to day. If you're watching this just because you're interested and you got to this far, thank you. Other than that, be well.